What I want to do today is just cover some relevant topics, some questions that we've been getting, but also just some basic feed efficiency areas. And some of these have to do with feed, some of them don't. And I think kind of my goal is to kind of give a bigger picture, some impact areas that we can have on feed efficiency, whether it's related to feed or whether it's even some environmental conditions like barn temperature, some other areas I'm going to talk briefly about. And then I'm going to get into some of the current some status of some feed processing research that we've been working on to, again, try and get more calories out of that every bite of feed and see where we can't maybe have an impact there to improve profitability. I'm going to wrap up with some ingredient and diet pricing updates as well as some additional resources. So once you leave here, some additional resources at K-State and other places to have on feed costs and feed efficiency. So a question we get, and I think it's always it's a more difficult question to answer, is a better feed efficiency, if I have a better feed efficiency, do I make more money? And if that was the case, every one of us in this room would be feeding a corn-soy diet with 5 or 6% added fat all year round. We wouldn't be using alternatives. We wouldn't be doing anything else because that would give us, in addition to that, we would grind feed very fine. We would extrude it and we would pellet it, and we would just have a massive increase in feed efficiency of what we do today at your home. The reason we can't do that is it costs us too much money. We can improve feed efficiency. There's a lot of technologies right now out there that we know of that we can't fully implement because the costs right now are such we can't have maximum feed efficiency. And that's a little bit discouraging that we have the genetic potential of a lot of these pigs right now, and we can't maximize it because it's going to cost us too much to do. If we'd go back 15, 20 years with some, again, the best genetics at the time, and there's nothing wrong with them, it's just where we continue to improve everything, we wouldn't be able to get these same type of feed efficiencies that we've been able to get with some of the genetic advancements. And so again, as we look at feed efficiency, the important point is what is my target? Based on the diets that I'm feeding, based on my conditions, what is my goal with this group? What's my target? And did I hit that or not? And so we got to take it back to a group basis because the reality is that we have a lot of things available to us. Unfortunately, we may not have pelleting. We certainly, many people obviously aren't going to have extrusion or expansion of feed. In some areas of the world that we do, and we see really nice improvements. But again, there's some things we just don't have. So it's back to what we can control and what we can do on our farm and making sure those groups close out the best that we can. That's how we can control it from a farm level basis a lot of times. And so again, just something to keep in mind. And again, the other side is the lowest cost diet. We can make, in the light of $7.30 corn right now, we can really cheapen your diet up, all right? The pigs may just perform like what, and that isn't your optimum. So we can do the extreme of maximizing feed efficiency. We can lower cost a lot, but there's some interactive things when we get too much mids, distillers, germ, soy hulls, whatever it is, that we have further negative consequences. So there's that balance, and that's not an easy. As a nutritionist, as many other producers, we struggle with what ingredients sometimes and what's our target, and that's a constant struggle we're never going to get away from. We just hope to be able to maximize and hit the targets of the diets and the conditions that we have for individual groups. From a feed efficiency standpoint, there's a multitude of things that influence it. At the end of the day, when we look at, if you have high feed disappearance, okay, we can have excess wastage. In winter, we know feed intake goes up because if we're not controlling the barn temperatures right, it's cold, they're going to eat more. And then it's going to make feed efficiency worse from that extra feed intake. Mortality. Mortality, again, we don't count those deads in the closeout weight because we didn't sell a dead animal, but they sure ate a lot of feed, and especially if we have high mortality in late finishing, man, that's where we really hurt ourselves in terms of profitability because we have all that expense, all that extra feed cost. Right now it's about $95 to $100 to feed that pig. And if it dies a week out from marketing, we're just out that. Okay? And so again, things we need to think about from all those standpoints. Low average daily gain and variety from a disease, if we have problems with feed availability, water availability, or temperature. Boy, it's been nice growing weather, right? This has been a nice spring and summer so far. Then 1 week it got really hot a few weeks back, but boy, it's been a nice beginning to summer. Probably growth rates, I assume, in most of your barns are pretty well, doing good compared to some of the temperatures this time of year we can start running into. And again, a lot of things influence feed efficiency. All right, K-State can't have a presentation without a feeder adjustment slide in. That's just a rule that, I don't know if it's on you. You have to sit through all these from Kansas. But the one thing that we recognize is, and it's still, I shouldn't say it's amazing, but as we get out to producers' places, and it isn't intentional a lot of times, feeder adjustment, we know what we need to do a lot of times. It just doesn't get done like, it's one of the things that we can control that has a big impact on feed efficiency, but oftentimes it doesn't get controlled well enough in the barns. And so again, we used to have, and again, if we go back 15 years ago, and us and others would have only about 20 to 30% pan coverage, but we have really increased that, to about 50 to 60% with most modern feeders. And the reason is that if you look at, there's a lot of feeder designs that are out here. And if you take a look at most of the bowls that we have on those today, they're a little deeper, they're a little taller up in the front lip. The opportunity for wasted feed is less than what it was on designs previously. And that's a good thing for you all. As we replace feeders, as you put new ones in, a lot of the feeder designs are better. And so we can actually have a little bit more feed in that feeder and actually not scrape and waste as much as what we once did. And so that's why we have changed some of our recommendations, and especially as we move to higher market weights, more competition, less square footage in pens that we've seen in a lot of cases. It used to be where we weren't crowding pigs as much. They had 3 things to do: eat, drink, and lay down all day. Okay, and there was plenty of time to do it. As we've decreased square footage, more pigs in that pen, we have to allow them. We don't need them to sit and rattle on that feeder for a long time. We need to have that feed there so they can eat, get out of the way for the next one. But again, still there's times where we go into too many operations and these feeders are just overflowing with feed. Okay, and not only is it bad from feed efficiency, it really reduces average daily gain because you have old stale feed in those feeders and the pigs just don't like to eat it. So again, we need to make sure we're adjusting those feeders properly. So what about feeders? We've been fortunate. We've been able to do quite a bit with comparing wet-dry feeders. And again, there's a lot of manufacturers of wet-dry feeders out here. And as we compare, because we get questions, and you probably have questions, well, if I'm going to go in, either put up a new barn or I need to go in and do some maintenance and replace feeders, is it worth putting in a wet-dry feeder, or do I stay with a conventional dry shelf feeder? And again, we need to recognize some differences that we'll see. And so in this wet-dry, these were 15 experiments done at New Horizon Farms there at Pipestone, Minnesota. We had half the feeders wet-dry, half conventional dry feeder. And again, if we average all these experiments together, they started about 74 pounds and ended about 230. And you'll see when we had the wet-dry feeder, we had a significant improvement in average daily gain, and average daily feed intake. But you'll notice on feed efficiency, what's that? Exactly the same. The pigs simply ate more, and they grew more, but they weren't any more efficient. So if the question is, will my pigs be more feed efficient based on these 2 feeders? It's no, but we can certainly get extra gain in the same time frame with a wet-dry feeder. But does that translate into profit? We'll look at the next slide to see. Again, because of the extra weight, we had higher hot carcass weight. The pigs are a little fatter. They're eaten. They're, as we'd expect, back fat. And even if we adjust for hot carcass weight, they're still fatter. Loins are very similar. And lean goes down. Again, a fatter pig, they're going to be less on a percent lean basis. Okay? So if we look at some economics of that, and again, there's different ways that we can look at economics depending on situations as we compare the 2 types of feeders. If we look at a dry feeder versus a wet, and this is on an income over feed basis, and here are some prices used in this, you'll see if we value that on the same feed efficiency because we had extra weight. So we're assuming here it was fixed time, and we're simply selling a heavier pig. Okay? Well, then it was profitable about $1.61 a pig from selling that extra weight. Now, if you have a grid where you get discounted for that reduction in lean, okay, it was still profitable but less. Now, in cases where we did, and again, it was mixed in the end, there was no difference in feed efficiency, but we did have some trials where there was a reduction. So if we take that 15 experiments, pull it apart a little bit, and we end up with a little poor feed efficiency, it'd be break even. And then if we had the lean reduction on top, it'd be negative. So again, depends on how you're selling, how your pack grid's set up. And again, there is differences. This was a Crystal Springs feeder. There's different designs, and I can't say one design. We haven't tested the different designs together. We get questions on tube feeders. We haven't done that, and there's very limited data on tube feeders. And quite honestly, my personal opinion is tube feeders are cheap to put in, but I see more problems with them because there's no feed storage. The feed outages are certainly more sometimes very hard to adjust that tube at the right width. I just don't like tube feeders, all right? So a conventional shelf or wet dry, we get along very well. I just have seen way too many problems with a conventional tube feeder. But again, they work in a lot of situations. Given the preference, I put in one of these other two. And again, it depends on how you're set up and what your goals are with your operation. Okay? All right, going to completely switch topics to temperature. Again, it's a very nice day, so blew my analogy if it was 105 today that we would be looking at getting out of the thermal neutral zone, but we're probably doing a good job staying in that today. So again, remember, as pigs grow, and you all know this, they need to be warmer when they're young, don't have to be as warm when they're old to maintain in that thermal neutral zone. When we fall into that range, pigs will be ideal in terms of growth, feed efficiency, where we're not affected negatively either way. And to illustrate this, is the summary of 3 experiments. This is older data, but still very relevant. There's been work done in other countries, and some of this temperature work is harder to conduct given to have enough pigs in chambers and in different scenarios. But if you look at the temperature in Fahrenheit, and again here we have 50, 72, or 95, and this is from a 50 to 125 pound pig. Again, this is the average of 3 different experiments that were conducted a few years back. But if you look, let's look here first at our baseline. I think that's important to set up first. So this group of pigs would do a 176 on gain, 4.2, and a feed efficiency of a 2.4. Okay? So if we made it cold, okay, on these pigs, gain went down. What happened to feed intake? Went up. As we'd expect, it's cold. They're going to eat more. Okay? That's my excuse. Even might be hot out. I'm still going to eat more. Okay? I still like that. But feed intake goes up. So when gain goes down a little bit, feed intake goes up. Inherently, feed conversion has to do what? Get blown up. Gets way worse. They ate more feed but gained less. That's not a good combination. So again, feed efficiency really got worse. Now, going into summer, this is more relevant to this, but again, this is more of an extreme chilling, a 50 to 125 pound pig. But again, certainly can happen. Here, this 95 degrees, what happened to feed intake? Dramatically went down, and that's what we tend to see. Obviously, in summer it gets hot. Everybody and pigs, everything doesn't want to eat as much. Gain, it went right down with it. And feed conversion also got slightly worse. Okay? So again, temperature influence has now. How do we control that? We just need to make sure we have the right fan settings, ventilation set up, misters, whatever we can do to keep our barns as cool as possible that's practical. Because again, feed efficiency will get slightly worse in summer because that maintenance requirement's eating so much more of that energy. Because if they still, all of us, we got a maintenance requirement today, okay? And so again, as those pigs are eating less, more of that energy has to go to the maintenance of the body, and less goes to gain. Feed efficiency is going to get worse. So again, we have to watch temperature. Disease or other stress, and again, this comes back into mortality. For every % increase in mortality, if we spread it evenly across the finisher, your closeout feed efficiency will be 0.015 less. Okay, so for every 1%. So if it's 5% mortality, take that number times 5. That would be basically, on average, an adjustment. Now, if you have more mortality in late finishing, obviously that number is going to go up because they ate that much more feed. So this is proportioned over the finishing period, okay? So again, we recognize mortality. If we have a group with high mortality, we normally don't like to look at the closeout feed efficiency because it's certainly worse than what we would hopefully target. Okay. I want to switch gears and talk about feed processing. And one thing, we're very fortunate at Kansas State. We have a brand new feed mill going in that's a joint project with our grain science department and animal science. Actually, on Monday, this coming Monday, we're supposed to push the first feed or flush to get all the bolts and everything out of the legs. We toured it here 2 weeks ago, and Terry Google, our manager, they started turning on different pieces of equipment. If they heard really bad rumbling, they quick shut it off, and they've been able to find wrenches, ladders, everything else, and all the different equipment that got left in. So, yeah, so we're going to push feed through, and we're going to see how many bolts are in that first corn that goes through the mill. Though we're fortunate, it's about a $16 million feed mill. And we're also very fortunate, Charles Stark, who's currently at North Carolina State in feed processing, did his work at K-State and worked with the Murphy Group and in out east for many years. He's actually starting back at K-State to run this feed mill for us, and we're really excited to get him back and to really expand work on feed processing that we're able to do currently at K-State. One of the things that we're able to do is work with several industry partners. Here's a project that was funded by the National Pork Board. John DeYoung, a current grad student, worked with this and was done up a new fashion. And a question that we've had a lot over the last couple of years is, you know, we recognize that as we grind corn finer, pigs are going to be able to have better feed efficiency and better average daily gain. They can utilize more calories out of that feed when we grind finer. But it was interesting. We did an industry survey with Iowa State about 2.5 years ago, had a very large number of respondents. And one of the questions was how to value grinding corn finer. Interestingly, producers did very poorly on that question. And this is something, you know, and we're not sure why, mainly they answered that they didn't know the value of grinding corn in terms of every 100 of the benefit of grinding finer. And so what we want to do is kind of revisit, and I'm going to get to the end, we have some fact sheets and some things that we put together. But kind of the rule of thumb, and I'll get to it, is for every 100 micron difference, feed efficiency will improve about 1.2%, or equivalent to 7 pounds of feed. So if I went from 600 to 500, you'd improve feed efficiency, and if you did another 100, it'd improve again. It's fairly linear. So again, we want to understand make sure people understand the value of grinding corn, but also grinding other ingredients. Right now, there's not many corn soy diets left in the Midwest or in the U.S. anywhere that we traditionally had fed. Now we have distillers. Some will bring in wheat mids. We got bakery, soy hulls in some areas, depending on prices. So the question is, if we grind all that stuff up, does it act the same as grinding corn or cereal grains? We make it finer. Can the pig utilize it more? So these diets here all contain 30% distillers and 20% wheat mids, 50% byproduct, okay? And then corn, soybean meal, and vitamins and minerals. So the control diet was 600 micron corn. Then we ground corn down to about 300. It was, I think, ended up being about 320, but around 300. And then we had ground the whole diet. So we've had a lot of questions. So I mixed this diet. I got a lot of mids, all this other stuff in. If I regrind the whole diet, will that give me more calories out of the diet than that the pig would utilize to grow better? So that's what we're trying to answer with this. And so let's look at the blue bars, because that's the meal feed. When we ground the corn finer, it wasn't significant, but it was a slight improvement in average daily gain. And that's what we'd expect. Because remember, corn, 50% of this diet's byproduct. Only 40 to 45% of this diet's actually corn. So it's a very small portion. So as we ground corn finer, we did have a numerical, but wasn't statistical. When we reground the whole diet, so this was the distillers, mids, the soybean meal, everything else, what happened to gain compared to the control? Ooh, you better not do that to you. You couldn't answer the question. Stayed the same. Okay? Stayed the same. So what that tells us is, and we've done this now with some other ingredients and in nursery pigs, that regrinding distillers, mids, we've reground soy hulls, we've reground soybean meal. We have not, in one case, been able to get any growth benefit of regrinding those ingredients compared to when they come into the mill in their normal form. There's not the starch there, there's fiber, and actually, when we did the soy hull project with National Pork Board, we actually, when we reground soybean hulls, performance actually got worse than not grinding because we made a whole bunch of fiber more available to tie everything up, we think. And so there's probably a benefit of not grinding fiber fine because it actually decreases digestibility more, which going in, that wasn't our goal. Our goal was to get more calories out of this stuff, and unfortunately, it showed that we're not going to be able to. And then you'll see we pelleted both those diets, got a very nice pelleting response. I'm going to talk about pelleting a little bit more in a couple slides, but again, the value of pelleting to improve daily gain is certainly there. From a feed efficiency standpoint, when we compare the two blue bars, the corn going from 600 down to 300 roughly, significant improvement. We would expect that. And actually, we were a little surprised to get this large of effect, again, when corn was only 40% of the diet, but certainly was there, shows the value of grinding our cereal grains finer. Now, can there be problems? Yes. If we grind too fine, flowability, and the dye doesn't flow as well, those things. So there's balances. So I'm not saying we need to grind everything to 300, but we need to understand the value of it and then see how we can work with mills or make it flow through the system at what level to get that benefit. Again, when we reground the whole diet, got a slight improvement, but the improvement came from probably the corn, probably not grinding the other ingredients because it was very similar. Now, when we pelleted, again, further improvements in feed efficiency as we would expect. So from a dollars and cents standpoint, what does that mean in this study? So on a margin over feed, so that's the revenue off of feed cost, about $53 on the 600 micron corn. When we ground the corn to 300, it was about $57. And again, all costs were included. We applied costs of grinding, pelleting, handling, all those things to each one of these individual diets. So those are accounted for. And then when we pellet, it was about $62. So again, in that case, about $9 improvement in profitability from grinding fine and pelleting. And that's why some very large systems have been doing this for years. That value is there. Now the problem is for many producers is your toll mill maybe doesn't have a pelleter. They maybe can't grind that fine. But it's again questions. No question have we seen most feed mills grinding finer corn than we were 3-4 years ago, certainly. Okay? But it just depends on what you can do and what you have available to you for feed. And again, we know that's a limitation in many cases. And so if we look at particle size on feed efficiency, again, if we look at back some historical data, it was about 1.2% for every 100 microns. We look at some more recent data we've done the last couple of years, it's about 1%. Grinding corn or wheat or milo or whatever it is, we're going to get a nice response in feed efficiency. So again, bottom line, feed efficiency improves roughly by about 1.2% for every 100 micron change. That equates to 7 pounds less of feed over that finishing period for every 100 micron change. And ultimately, it's right around $1 a pig for every 100 micron change. So if we went from 700 to 500, that's about $2 a pig. Okay? So again, depends on how far, what you can do practically. We know everybody isn't going to be able to go to 350 by any stretch, but that's what's out there potentially available for us if we could do that. Okay. So again, I've already talked about some of this from, kind of got ahead of myself on a few of these things, but again, feed efficiency is impacted by particle size of cereal grains. Corn, our cereal grains are very predictable. Our other ingredients, unfortunately, we're just not able to get an effect. And I'll be honest, that's very disappointing to us. We were hoping that we'd be able to get some responses out of some of these other ingredients that are more prevalent in our diets, or even the whole diet grinding. We're just not able to on a number of studies. So, but that was very good information to find out. Unfortunately, we just weren't able to get that to go. Now, the one thing I would like to point out is this last one, the testing method. There's very uniform procedures for testing particle size. The one thing that is a difference is that some labs will use what we call a flow agent. basically to help the particles flow through a stack of sieves. If you've never seen it, there's about 12 sieves. We dump 100 grams of corn in, and it just basically gets beat on for a period of time. And then the particles settle out through these different screen sizes, we reweigh, and there's a calculation to come up with that. If you use a flow agent, it helps the particles flow through. So if I had 500 micron corn and I use a flow agent, it'll actually give me a reading somewhere around 440, 450. If I don't use a flow agent, it was 500. So again, depending on your lab, depends what your test results. And so a relevant question is the lab using a flow agent? Because if it is, you're getting a value that's actually in overestimation of how good that corn is ground. And so especially when toll mills are trying to hit targets, if I'm a toll mill, okay, and I'm not saying that any of them do this, okay, if you use a flow agent, you could be grinding 550 corn and showing a 500 reading, and it's a whole lot easier to grind 550 corn than 500, okay? So again, it's not intentional, it just depends how it's set up. So just know what you're getting, I guess, from a lab standpoint. Very important point to follow. And again, 80 micro, around 80, it varies, but that's kind of an average there that we kind of like to go off of. All right, pelleting. Going to go back to that a second. I know in the study we talked about particle size and pelleting. As we kind of look at pulling those apart a little bit, over the last several years, this is all data that we've worked with at K-State over the last 7-8 years. Again, very predictable. About 5% average daily gain response, about 4% feed efficiency response to good quality pellets. Whenever you have a good quality pellet, and a good quality pellet we would term of being less than 20% fines at the feeder. So if you went into the feeder that has pelleted feed, scoop it out and sift off the fines and do the initial weight, sift the fines and do a final weight. There should be no more than 20% fines. If you get over 20% fines at the feeder, you might as well not have pelleted that diet. Their performance is lost because you end up with fines and they're going to sort, they're going to work that feed. So again, if you're going to pay for pelleting, there needs to be less than 20%. Okay? And again, here's an example. This is a project Jeremiah Nemechek, who's one of our students, worked with New Fashion and Hubbard Feeds, and this reiterates that. This is 30 to 70 pound pigs, got a nice pelleting response from, this is the same diet, just in different forms, meal to pellet, or we work 30% fines back in. Again, no benefit. And a lot of the other studies where we've worked different levels of fines, we come back to that 20% level as being kind of a point that we feel we need to be under to make sure we get our response to pelleting. Okay? And again, if you have extra fines, I know this is a little foggy. Basically, it looks like a complete meal feed down in. You actually want to see pellets in the bottom of the feeder if you're feeding pellets, okay? All right, if you're just seeing meal, there's obviously a lot of fines, and the benefit of pellets is to have pellets in the pan because it's not as easy to work out. You have better feed intake. When you end up with a lot of fines, you'll have sorting, you'll have the corners filling up, you'll have feed that they don't want to eat in there. If you're in that situation, you might as well not be pelleting. You're wasting your money on pelleting if you end up with that level of fines. Okay. I'm going to completely switch gears and just talk briefly on some of the, with the ethanol industry extracting more oil, us and many others are looking at how these products fit or where their feeding value is in diets for swine. And this is a study we just completed this last fall looking at a de-oiled product. And here's the analysis. It's about 7.5% fat. For reference, we would assume a regular distillers without having oil extraction is somewhere around 10 to 10.5% fat in most cases. So we have about 3% oil taken out. So less oil in means less energy. And so we want to see how the pigs performed. And so here's from 0 up to 45%. And we would have expected average daily gain to go down. I mean, we were realistic about whenever we remove energy from any ingredient, performance is going to get worse. We want to test to see what was the impact. And you'll see as we went even from 15, 30, and 45%, a linear decrease in performance. Fairly good magnitude as we look. Because again, normally in high quality, normal distiller grains, most trials, and us too, have shown up to 30% of the diet, we'd have equal performance of that as the corn and soy. Well, as we remove oil, we see that's not the case, as we'd expect. If we have less gain, we maintain feed intake. Feed efficiency gets worse as well. And you'll see that's a linear increase up as we included more of the de-oiled products into the diet. From a yield standpoint, while you do not get paid on yield, the yield of the pig helps dictate the final carcass weight that you do get paid on. So live weight as well as yield helps determine your final carcass weight. We know when we feed diets that are higher in fiber that yield goes down. What happens is fiber is in the digestive tract of the pig, the actual digestive lining gets a little bit thicker because, the human health side, have fiber in your diet. Well, what happens is the digestive tract gets a little bit thicker, supposedly healthier, whatever healthy means, right? So if you extract that out of a pig, well, that's not part of the carcass, so you lose some of that weight. The other side is that that in the large intestine we have. This is a great grad student activity, and I help as well. But we basically collect digestive tracts and start stripping all of the digesta out of the large intestine, the cecum, everything else. And there's about 2 pounds extra of digestive manure in the large intestine and cecum of pigs fed higher byproduct diets than that of a corn and soy. There's more retained in. There's more, It's kind of like, I got to go show pigs later today. Okay, I got my kids with, we got 2 York barrows. And so this morning before I came over, what were we giving them in their feed? More fiber. And why was that? Fill them up. The same thing's happening here, okay? The same thing happens. They get fuller off of that, and there's more total waste in that digestive system. So we lose all that. Yield goes down about 2%. So the combination of a lighter pig, less yield, will take the hot carcass weight and continually push it down. Okay, and so both of those would be negatives on these. Now, if we go to the carcass quality, as we'd expect, anytime we feed an ingredient that's higher in unsaturated fats, such as corn oil, bakery that has more of the soybean oils types in, carcass iodine value gets worse. This is nothing new. Distillers has been this way since it's come out. It's not as bad, and as you would expect, it wouldn't be as bad because there's less oil in the product to start with. But it still does get worse in terms of iodine value, which is a measure of firmness, with the higher number being that they're softer. So again, it's a negative, but it's not as bad as what, even though that number's going up, on normal distillers, it goes up at a quite a bit steeper slope. Okay. So what I want to do next is talk about some pricing. And so if we go back in history a little bit to this first week in June, and I'm able to get prices from a mill in northwest Iowa, so this is coming out of Iowa, looking at weekly pricing. And if we go back and look from 2009 to 2013, the first week in June, you'll see again, and I don't need to tell anybody in this room as you guys write the checks for feed, seeing where corn's come up, and actually now, this first week in June, corn is as high as it's been, at least the first week in June is over the last 5 years. When I gave this talk last year and corn was sitting at $6, then by the end of June it wasn't $6, okay? It took off really quick, so I can be made to look like a fool pretty quick throwing up a 1 week's price, but that's what happens, right? That's the volatility, but that's just where we're at today. Soybean meal, in conjunction with corn being the highest relative, is a lot higher than we've had the first week in June over the last 5 years. Okay? Distillers, yeah, it's not as high as last year, but again, the value of distillers is much less today than it has been historically. And this is for a 7% or an 8% fat product. Fat is actually in decent shape relative to history. The one thing too is that it's much lower is lysine compared to the last. So the value of our synthetic amino acids is better than it's been previously. So we look at what's the cost of a finishing pig from 50 to through the Paline diet to about 280. Again, 60. We jumped to 90 over that, and now we're sitting at 100. Of course, last fall, if we'd have taken prices about 125 for a period of time. So I'm not sure this is good news saying it's $100, but unfortunately, that's where we're at today. So I just want to put some example diets together to show some different value of different ingredients currently. So we have, what I have is just a single phase. It's from 125 to 170 pounds of body weight. I use those prices off of our sheet from this week. 730 corn, 750 or 774 bean meal, the distillers, wheat mids at 212, meat and bone that's available in the mill, as well as our Monacal and limestone. Okay, a lot up here. Okay, I don't expect you to digest everything, but what I want to show here is I have a corn soy diet. So this is corn soy, low level of synthetic lysine at 3 pounds. This would be a standard diet. Higher amino acids, synthetic amino acids. Okay, and with these diets still balanced, we'd expect equal performance on those. If we used 5% meat and bone meal, if we had a diet with 30% distiller grains, a diet with 20% wheat mids, or a diet with the mids and distillers combination, so a high byproduct diet, 50% of the diet. These diets are formulated to a lysine-calorie ratio as many as your diets would be formulated to at home. That's how nutritionists would formulate that. Again, one thing you'll notice here on crude protein, as we use more synthetics, protein goes down as we'd expect. As we use distillers, it goes up, okay, as we'd expect, just due to the standpoint of having excess protein, less digestible protein in distillers. All right, so this is the same as above. What I want to get down here is to this, the ultimate pricing and where we're at. So if we look at our base diet is $322 for this middle range finishing diet. Using synthetic amino acids drops it, okay? And also have a feed budget because as energy changes, these diets are not made with add fat to be isocaloric. So as we add wheat mids, what happens to diet energy? Goes down, so it takes more feed, okay? Same way with the low oil distiller grains. It takes more feed to get on the same gain because it's lower energy. So after we adjust for diet costs, put the feed budget in, get it to a cost per pig. So what this tells me is higher synthetic amino acids make sense. It saves us within that phase. That makes sense because synthetic lysine's lower price relative to history, and soybean meal is higher. So that makes sense. Meat and bone, yeah, it doesn't price in. It prices itself out. But distillers, look at here. We're still dropping in price, about $1.50. Okay? Wheat mids save us about $1, and the combination then are additive together to save us, roughly $2.40, somewhere in there. Okay? So is that the diet we should feed? So is that my message? Boy, you need to go home and throw in a whole bunch of mids and distillers. Okay, it's the cheapest diet. Okay? Well, it's back to all the complicating factors that can come with our high energy, low energy, high fiber ingredients. It can decrease cost the most, but is it the most economical? That's the question. Here's some data. Again, if we look at carcass weight basis, here's a diet with 30% distillers, 19, just around to 20% wheat mids over that whole period. What I want you to look at is the two outside bars first. Low, which is corn soy diet, and high, which is the 30% distillers, 20% wheat mids. Just look at those two. You'll see on a carcass weight basis, we gave up about 3 pounds, and that's not unexpected, okay, because it's lower energy. We'd expect them to be lighter. So can we save enough over that finishing period to offset the loss in revenue if we're on a fixed days? That's the question that we have to deal with. And so again, practically what we do though is we generally do not feed that diet if you're feeding Paline or that last diet. Normally we moderate. We shouldn't be feeding 30% distillers and 20% wheat mids all the way to finishing. Most nutritionists and producers will reduce the level in that last diet to help not have some of the yield problems and get some energy back to pick up some growth in late. And when we do that, we have all these different combinations. Basically, we cut it in half or we just moved them back to corn soy, a lot of different things. But what you'll see is whenever we put in some sort of modification strategy, we got close back. So what many producers do is we'll feed some of these if economical, during a good portion of finishing, then the last 20, 30 days, switch them back to a different diet to recoup and not have some of the negative impacts associated with some of our low energy, high fiber ingredients. And that's a very practical regimen that we can save money early, get them back on a moderate diet late, and pick some of that performance and hopefully the economics back up with that. Okay? So there's several web resources at our website, ksuswine.org. We have lots of Excel-based break-even calculators, different particle size information we've talked about today, marketing calculators, different sow gestation feeding tools to make sure that we're feeding, not misusing feed, or make sure we have sows in the optimum body condition at that point. And here's just a cover of our web page. Encourage you, there's a lot of stuff. If you ever have questions, you can visit with one of us there at K-State. The other thing I want to point out is a website, swinefeedefficiency.com. This is a joint website with Iowa State and Kansas State, John Patience at Iowa State, and there's a large USDA project we've been working on. A lot of information is being put on there, a lot of genetics, disease, a lot of different areas outside of feed. And so that's an active website. We try and keep updated with some of the latest information to help producers and some of the latest research with swine feed efficiency. But also this last a few months ago, we posted a whole series of fact sheets. These are front-back, very easy-to-read, bottom-line fact sheets on all these different areas on feed efficiency in terms of genetics, particle size, pelleting, the environmental temperature, market weights, energy, paling, and so on. So again, if you want information on some of these areas, I would encourage you to visit this website. Those front-back fact sheets hopefully are get to the bottom line of their impacts.